now I'm doing still the same thing. I just think it's been about 5 years since we installed the Wyss garden, which is over in Chinatown on Gore Avenue. And to look at a garden like that transformed a space that was an empty lot, and it became, Ken Lum's house was there, and believe me, I heard endless stories how sad it was. We took the house out and replaced it with a forest. So yeah, I just think about that, how people hold on to nostalgia in weird ways. And meanwhile, you know, I was really happy that the birds and the bees and different critters were actually celebrating having a forest in between these buildings. And further to today, where the youth who I trained in that are now running that site, that gallery space, and they do the programming themselves. They bring in people, they do the work on the land. And that's, you know, we need to really think about the work we do. Is it going to serve the next generation? How will it serve the next generation? And will it phase itself out, or will it rebuild and transform into even better possibilities? So that's the work that I really groove on doing with young people, because, you know, they love to tease you. So you get there and you get teased about yourself. It's kind of fun, because then you feel like you're at home, right? And there's all those good feelings that come out. Like young people, it's because they say what's on their mind, and they have zero to lose, by the way, especially in this city. This city is like unforgiving to young people, unforgiving to the land, unforgiving to Indigenous people. So they're always my top priority, and they never let me down. They always are there. You know, they'll show up even if they can't do the work. They're there. By showing up, I tell them they do the work by showing up and being on the land. And it's, you know, it's just when you have had zero of these things in your life, and you've seen it in outside communities and alongside the communities you've lived in, you get an opportunity to give some empowerment to people that have never had it, and you let it flow. And that's how I work, is that I make sure that young people are empowered, that they know who they are. And if they don't, then they find a sense of it by being on the land, and they always find their ancestors in different ways. So yeah, so I love working with plants. I love working with the language, with our art forms, with our youth and children. And yeah, I don't know what else I can add. I think beautiful. I want to keep it flowing though. We'll see.
Hi, Sis. So there's a lot to consider. I think that generational approach. When I look around and there's young people who are really vulnerable in seeking culture and seeking belonging in communities. And it does take a really serious vulnerability within our communities to seek culture and belonging, because so much is protected. This is the outcome of having some taken away and banished. Young people are even afraid to ask for guidance because of how sensitive. We don't always know what's sensitive, what can we know, what can we ask, you know, and it takes being vulnerable, and looking around at these young people and recognizing, you know, maybe that young person was raised in a strong family. Maybe I was raised in a family that suffered from substance abuse more than they were culturally active. And that young person's going to know more than my elder. And so turning to our elders isn't always an option. Sometimes we're looking at our young people for these answers. It's a state. It's the state. And so forgiveness and understanding when we look to these young people, I'm really grateful that you took that forward thinking approach, and beautiful work with plants, our plant relatives. You know, every new root that goes back into the city feeds that chwili, feeds that spirit in the land. So thank you for your good work, hard work. last night I was at a ceremony. I'm just going to keep it rolling in a second here. And one of our elders, who always says things kind of harshly, says, if it doesn't sting, or he says, if I'm talking and it stings a little bit, then I know you're listening. And that's old school. That's old school right there. You know, not everybody's going to say something that's, you know, soft and tolerable or like easily digested. You know, some different people have different approaches. And when we really open our hearts and our minds and we listen, we just take what we need. And that's all we ask, is that you take what you need. I'm going to pass it on to Tasha. If you do a brief intro so we know who you are and talk a bit about your work, please.
Hasquael, Tasha Faye Evans, Quian Snat, a Tlikanatsna Say Mamet, currently known as Port Moody, where I'm raising my 2 children. My lands and waters begin in what is currently known as Nanaimo. My great-great-grandmother, her name was Elizabeth Klahoya, and she married William Isbister, who was one of the first settlers into what became known as Nanaimo, and it was the first Hudson's Bay trading post that was built on extraction. The first disruption of how land became resource. And I am the 5th generation grandchild trying to find my way back to walking on this land in a good way. My grandfather and his brothers and sisters, and his brothers were all loggers. And my dad, down to me, by then, they forgot where they came from. Nobody knew where we were from. And I used to visit an old growth forest, Coxsix. It's colonially known as the Walbrand Valley, just outside of Lake Cowichan. And the land spoke to me there so strongly. I'm an artist, and I decided there was a tree. There was this big, beautiful, old red cedar tree, and at the top of her, there was a woman standing with her hands raised to the sky. And behind her was this amazing old growth forest, and in front of her was a clear cut that we fought and lost. And I heard her tell me, you got to find out where you are, girl. So I did. I went to the archives and I found my great-great-grandmother. She was not my great-great-grandmother, because I didn't know that yet then. My great-grandmother was born on Cedar Road, and there's 2 Cedar Roads. There's one just outside of Nanaimo, and there's one on its way to the Walbrand Valley and the Couch. And I later found out it's the Cedar Road outside of Nanaimo. But for me, it was like she was calling me home. The land speaks to me. And so when we sit here in these chairs and our feet are on this ground, on the cement, underneath the cement, the land that the city is built upon is built on mother log after mother log after mother log. Just down the water, there was a longhouse that was there, and people came and sang and danced, and their prayers went into the wind since time immemorial. And it really is true, the land does speak to us. Sometimes you can, if you're listening, you can hear the songs, you can feel the songs in the wind, because they've been sung and they continue to be singing. They continue to be singing in these winds since time immemorial, regardless of whether there is a cement building and it's now called False Creek. The land is here, and the stories are in the land, telling us how to be, how to show up in this world. There's mountains, there's sisters telling us how to keep the peace. There's a big, huge rock telling us about how we got to be devoted to our family and be spiritually strong. And I was just listening to my brother, Ronnie Dean Harris, speak the other day, and he was saying how every fold in the mountain is telling a story. Every one of those folds is a creek, and every creek has a story that it's telling. And the people that walk on this land, that have been walking on this land since time immemorial, grandchildren, as like me, I'm the 5th grandchild, we can hear those stories. We can hear those songs in the wind. And so I was thinking about my intention today and about, like, you know, the panel, and so glad that we started with the land, because I really want to invite you all to reframe how you look out on this land and these waters. Really consider that only 150 years of disruption. That's not too long. When you think about back east, that's 500 years. But over here, it's only 150. And when we walk, our ancestors are so, they rattle to the surface. And so when you look on this land, I just invite you to see it as old and as rich with story and song. And that the people here, the people that are original caregivers of these lands, they hold those stories in their hearts. And so when you build your cities and when you make your policies, when you're teaching your children, I invite you to consider always having an original caregiver of these lands with you at that table. Because it's time we need to remember ourselves to this, to the vibration that is here humming. There's a creek underneath this building. How many creeks are rolling and rumbling underneath your building? So yeah, that my intention was to share, even if just to offer a reframing of how you walk along the sidewalk. If when you leave this room and you leave today, how will you carry what you've heard today? How will you greet the songs in the wind? Oh,
Woo. Thank you, Tasha.
Really good.
You know, there's something about artists and poets, right? Like artists and poets feel so deeply, they just can't help it. And I know because I'm an artist, I formerly a poet, and my mom's an engineer. So my mom works at GHL Consulting downtown, and she's a fire safety engineer, super literal, super like facts, right? And I'm like all in my feels, you know, like always in my feels, but we can communicate. We can communicate and we can pull each other into our space and our frame of thought. And that's exciting, right? Shared values in shared space. And I worked in politics for a number of years. And a lot of times in politics, people are talking about the same thing in a different way. And then they go around in a circle and they say it again. And they're like, you're not listening to me. And then they say the same thing in a different way, but they're saying it differently than each other, but they're saying the same thing. And I think of, where do you tie together the people? We're all people. You can tie us together in our values, right? And that's a good place to start. So food is another great place, right? And I think about how I actually just shared a meal with Brandon's parents a couple of weeks ago.
I didn't even know
He
that.
wasn't there. Where were you, Brandon? So I was sharing a meal with Brandon's mother, and she must have saw something in my eyes that liked the trees in her backyard. Her backyard is like the Garden of Eden, or you know, and it's not manufactured Garden of Eden. It's like the
Beautiful.
creators there.
It's beautiful. Yeah.
So she walks me to the back door and she's like, you see all those trees? She's like, those trees, me and those trees, we have an understanding. We have an understanding. And I was like, cottonwoods. Anybody who knows poplar and cottonwood knows that, you know, winter comes and they just start throwing branches. And it's not appropriate for residential neighborhoods or commercial, you know, like it's not an appropriate tree. Get rid of it as fast as you can. But she has an agreement with those trees that they don't throw branches at her house.
They don't.
And they don't. Now, it's not as easy as being like, yo, you know, Quapesh. That's their name. But to develop a relationship, this is deep. This is really deep, right? These deep, meaningful relationships with the world around us, right? Through language. It's a beautiful thing. I'm going to pass the mic over to Brandon, talk about his practices and connections to land. See him.
And so I'm also a graduate of Emily Carr University of Art and Design. I'm a sculptor, carver, and painter. And so public art is a big part of my practice. And so I'm doing 2 residencies right now. So one is at an elementary school in a district in Maple Ridge in my territory. I'm carving a 12-foot house pole. And I'm also doing a residency at a high school in Langley as well. And we're constructing this massive, like a Coast Salish longhouse facade with artwork, and high school students are a big part of it. And so I think, you know, one of the, I mean, case in point, you know, my children are here. A big part of my practice is working with children, kindergarten to grade 12. And a big part of my day, I'm centering other people's children in my life. I travel great distances far from my children to go be with children of settler descent, and center them all day long while I'm away from my own kids. And so today I invite my children to be in my space. Just for 1 hour, I'm gonna center my children while I work. Thank you. Just be good with that. Thanks. Yes. And I'm not going to apologize. Thank you. I apologize to nobody about bringing my children here and having them speak loudly or come take the mic. Zero. This is their land. This is their home ancestrally, and they're welcome to speak on it anytime they want. And so thank you. Did he just talk back to me? Oh, did he? Yeah, is that what he said? Yeah, that's my boy. That's my boy. And so, you know, listening to Cease and Tasha speak, you know, I remember it was a few years back, there was another symposium organized by a university, and I was a speaker here. And I remember what I talked about, how we are on Salish land. And I acknowledge that I am also on Musqueam territory, that I'm also Tsleil-Waututh territory and Squamish territory as well. And that even though I have kinship here, I also acknowledge that I'm a guest. But one of the things that I pointed to the audience that day when I spoke here was, if you just look out this window here, if you look out this window, what from this vantage point informs you that you are on Salish land? Please tell me. What is it? What is screaming, this is Salish land? Yeah, but the sky, but nothing else though, right? That's why we're here. We're here because that's a problem. And we need to do something about it, right? And so, this is why I think art is so important, however that manifests. And I think we are in this like in an interesting time in this country, because for decades, I know there have been other Indigenous artists who came before me who worked so hard ensuring that the Indigenous story was told here through their practice. And we didn't always get Salish art presented onto this land. a lot of the time it was art that was transported from another territory, planted here because it looked good on the tourist brochures, but then the local Indigenous people were not seen anywhere. And I'd like to think that things have moved along somewhat since then, but it hasn't. But I think one of the things that, one of the, like we have, like working in the in the public education realm, when the Truth and Reconciliation Commission policy was first introduced in 2015, I think there was a lot of people in the Indigenous education system who thought, yes, finally, we're going to get, things are going to move and we're going to move forward. And these people are going to listen to us. And it actually didn't really happen that way. It wasn't like that at all. There was a lot of resistance to it. There still is. And I would say that this Truth and Reconciliation policy and the calls to action that came from it have still been underrepresented policy-wise when it comes to how cities plan their spaces, how cityscapes look, how neighborhoods look. There's very little in my mind. There's not enough. There's just not enough visibility for what are the vision that we have, the vision that these cities have and these organizations have aren't aligning. And so I always just feel like I'm always neck deep in it. I'm talking to city planners, city councils, school trustees, PAC groups, architects, you name it. I talk to all of them, and it's just these kind of events and this type of this type of symposium is so needed here, badly needed. We need like 10 of them, like in every neighborhood. Anyways, thank you.
Hi, Cho. Brandon. Lots to take away there. And thank you for including your son in this important work. Sometimes they just lighten the place up, Sometimes the energy of a child is enough to lighten up a whole room. And we got to be grateful for that. So just while they're getting situated here, what Brandon said brings me to the term master narrative. And there's this seeming lack of a master narrative in Coast Salish society. But I'm looking at both sides of the debate. Is it lacking? Is it present? Because what appears to be like disjointedness or maybe people not agreeing on things is a lot like, going back to what I said at the beginning of the day, agreeing to the protocols of one's own house while you're a guest in their house. Also agreeing, that many communities, house to house to house, have different protocols from one another. And even my own family, different protocols, right? People say, oh, you come from the same family. Maybe we come from similar protocols, but if I'm going to my cousin's house, I'm going to sit in her house and I'm not going to impose my protocols on her in her house. And so language is a lot like that, right? Me and Christie Lee, we might be able to sit and talk in our different dialects to one another without speaking each other's dialect and still understand each other because they're similar, but they're also different. And so neighborhood to neighborhood, house to house, I don't think there's going to be blanket answers. And that's confusing at times. It's confusing when you're looking for answers because there's this seeming lack of a master narrative. What does that chouchouas mean on your shirt, Brandon? Well, it's going to mean something different to me. It's going to mean something different to him. And it's going to mean something different to the school that has it as a logo. And that's okay. That's okay. So we're going to finish off with some good words from our dear friend Christie Lee. Maybe a brief introduction so we can get to know you and your work a little bit as well. Hi, Joe.
Si amnesty antaskachlia telitin atla sanach tamas telitin atla homasquiamas tamas. Aitan swallowing quitsni quitsnala nasi amnesia height zepka tan swalla qua ete height zepka nasi amnesia. Sanatan thalamat quasanaman alf tzamkin si thanamamana e Kamora I almuch e Sophia. That's an osmat and than mamana. Heitzepka ta mamana ete heitzepka. It's in Kuala Kaminam Kani, hi Tanishvas Kanita Makan. Good day, my honored and respected friends. My name is Skachlia. My English name is Christie Lee Charles, and I come from this place where we're gathered today. This area where we are is connected to Sanok and other villages, all other villages. I live in the village of Skalech, which is over on Musqueam Indian Reservation. It's also known as DHRT4, an archaeological wet site. You can find 7,000-year-old basket fragments out at the Museum of Anthropology. It's also a place where Kaistam once lived. Just before I go on, a lot of the stuff that we're sharing with you, it's our protocol to share, say who we are, where we're from, and the knowledge that we're sharing, it all belongs to our people and our families. So it's the intellectual property, of our people. So we're just sharing it so you can take it into your hearts and minds, not to start running with it and putting it online and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, so where I live, it is where Kaistam once lived, and she was the one that held our Sanu in our territory, and there was big long houses all over in this village where I live now, right at one of the creeks that comes up from the mouth of the river. And yeah, that's where Sanu was spoken of. Heads of families would gather there. And this big stone, Kaistam, had many representations. Like many of us, we all wear different cedar hats, and she had different connections to different things. And it's funny, she was lost for some time, and then our late archaeologist Wayne Point found her down by the riverbank and brought her back up, and she now sits in our council chambers at Musqueam. So she still gets to hear all the laws, and she's pretty powerful. I just wanted to thank my families for being here. Carrie Lynn, I'm like, wow, Carrie Lynn's here. We're pretty fortunate, yeah, she carries so much knowledge, and it's just an honor to see you here and see the work that you do. And each and every one of you, it's honor. You guys are lucky we have to have this many Coast Salish people sit and share and honor our families in the room as well, our Musqueam families in the room. It was so cool to see Uncle Nick, Uncle Nick open the floor and welcome everyone today. When we were talking, I was like, hey, we got to give him some space, like introduce who he is and where he's from, because he's not, like I was saying, we all wear many cedar hats. He's not just, someone who does a welcome and then, he's got to go. He's got so many different things and amazing things that we do. And it's just really happy to be here because you're all here for a reason, right? You guys all have, an eye and a voice and an eye, eyes, a vision. Sorry, I had to come here, like I'm a parent too, like we're all parents and grandparents and aunties and whatnot. And I was like about half an hour, 45 minutes late because I have 4 children and I was running them to school and to their other school. And then one didn't want to get up. So I was like, okay, I'll pick you up when I get back and then you have to go. So, and then like just getting here, like, there's construction workers fixing the park across the street and they were like swearing. And I'm like, do you have to swear? Like come in our community and just like be mad at our land and like swear in our kids' park, like, and then like just the traffic. And then I was just like, oh, creator, I was like sitting there and I sometimes feel like Pocahontas or a Disney princess because I'm like, oh, creator, come on. Like, then these 2 eagles fly by. I'm like, oh, thank you. It's a good day. They get here and I'm just like, oh, okay, it's time to relax and go talk about the land. I was like, but oh, I'm so frustrated. Then trying to pay for parking, and I'm like, oh, this app's not working. I'm like, oh, my card's not working. I'm like, shit, I got to download this thing. And I'm like coming in here, and everybody's like, oh, hi. And I'm like, okay, hey, I'm just still trying to freaking park here. And then I seen somebody's status the other day. She's from Musqueam, and she's saying like, how many more parking apps do you need to download? And I was like, geez, the city needs to make like, record this. This is my idea. The city needs to make an app for like the 3 host nations, like Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. Like we're all recorded. We all have like, you know, status numbers. We can all just apply and like punch in some kind of code because you guys all have us registered. But I mean, that's stolen land. Like a lot of the parking lots across the land are privately owned. They're not, you know, the city's like, oh, we can't do anything. I'm like, yeah, you can. So anyways, I could share and share and share. And I just I love living here, and I'm just so thankful, yeah, that I get to share about who I am and where I'm from, and like kind of live in a way our ancestors did. Like I'm so lucky I don't have to go do a city 9-to-5 job, but I can, you know, come here and share my knowledge and make the change. And when you're talking about how the old people will get frustrated and they're really stern, I was on a meeting online yesterday, and I was just like hearing the same stuff again and again. And I'm like, oh, you guys don't know who your own council is? Like, what the heck? And then I got a little bit grumpy, and I was like, oh, but they have to hear that side sometimes, right? They have to hear the truth of like how frustrating it is as a person from this land to always, you know, keep re-educating and say moving past. Like, yeah, we do public art and we do these murals and these projects, but it's more than that, right? Like sitting at the table, you know, some of us are at another table together, and, you know, sitting there, the architects and the designers and the landscapers are like, oh yes, let's make a recognition wall at the entrance. Oh, let's make a recognition piece outside. And I'm like, you're still keeping us outside. You know, you invite us here, but you're keeping us outside. And it's more than, you know, we're not just artists. There's no word in our languages that translate to the word art. There's no word that says public art. Right? It's our way of life. We wake up every single day. Yesterday, I was writing a plan out for another project I'm working on. My partner's like, hey, what's that? Look in your head. And there's a ladybug like crawling along. I was like, oh, it's a good, nice. It's a ladybug. And I put it on my arm, and it crawled on my paper as I was writing. And I was like, this is how important it is. Right? Every little piece is important. It's not just the salmon. It's not just the water. It's not just the trees. Every little being, you know, in our stories and our creation stories is connected to every tiny little being, even those annoying mosquitoes, right? You know, they are an important part of our whole cycle of life. And back to the tables I was talking about, you know, we're not just artists, we're professionals in our ways. Like we've been building longhouses since time immemorial, right? So we're professional architects from thousands of years ago. Reef netting evidence has came from Cessnom, 70th and Granville, that says, you know, Musqueam people have been doing reef netting for over, you know, 2,000 years, mass creations of beads there as well. Evidence is in the land, it's written everywhere. And yeah, I'm so thankful we get to share and live in this time, and it's not illegal and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I'm really old school too. I could sit here and talk around the fire all night, but we have to roll. So heights up, kind of see.